Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Tyler. I'm a 22-year-old guitar player here in West Virginia, and today I got a fun video for you guys. I'm going to be going over my first pedal. This is the Danelectro Fab Series Metal. And before I get into this specific pedal, I'm going to be going over the history of Danelectro. Okay, so this is going to be one of the oldest brands that I've covered on my channel. Danelectro got its start in 1947. In New Jersey, and it was founded by a man named Nathan Daniel, and he was a bit of a genius. He manufactured a whole bunch of things. He got to start making amps, then he moved over to effects, and then later guitars. But the first thing that he was doing was in the late 40s, he had a contract with Sears and other department stores. And the first thing that they had him doing was making amps. So he made all the amplifiers that Sears would sell. And that was under the Silvertone name for Sears. And there were other department stores that held Danelectro products. And they had other names such as Airline or Danelectro, and again, Silvertone. And they were all the same brand. And that carried into the 1950s, where there was much more demand for electric guitars coming out. Obviously, the Fender Telecaster came out in 1950, and then soon after that, the Gibson Les Paul. So Nathan Daniel was contacted by Sears. They were like, hey, we need you to start manufacturing some guitars for us. And another thing was he had pretty tight budget restraints, so what he had to do was come up with an innovative way to make these guitars, but make them cheap. So what he did is, instead of making them out of mahogany, basically all the popular woods at the time, he used cheaper woods such as poplar and masonite, which is particle board. And so they were super light, basically semi-hollow bodied guitars. He later made solid body guitars made out of the same material. And though the materials were super cheap, he did not skimp on the quality of guitars. So some of the 1950s Danelectros are some of the most sought after guitars. People later in the 80s, such as Eddie Van Halen, would find these old Danelectros and take the necks off and then make parts guitars using the necks, because they either felt that good or they really enjoyed the flat fingerboard radius that they had, which also became pretty popular with slide guitars. So the guitar innovation continued throughout the 50s. They were still being sold in basically all the department stores in America. In 1956, Danelectro actually made the first 6-string bass, and though it didn't catch on at the time, you can find 6-string basses being readily available and being made by all the big brands today, and Danelectro was the first one to do that in 1956. And things were good for Danelectro up until 1966, where Nathan Daniel sold the company to MCA, known as the Music Corporation of America. And what they did was they wanted to get away from being a department store brand. And so what they did is they tried to market Danelectro to mom and pop stores. They pulled them all out of Sears, and that's when things started to get bad. And within 3 years, it completely shut Danelectro down. In 1969, they went out of business because they couldn't keep up the sales that they were making when they were readily available. Okay, so then between 1969 all the way up until 1995, Danelectro was not a brand. There was no products being made, nothing like that. And that all changed in 1995 when another genius, a man by the name of Steve Rittinger, and the Ibanez Corporation went ahead and bought the Danelectro name. And right away they got to work on making new products for Danelectro. And then in 1997 at NAMM, they came out with the first new Danelectro products, which was a line of effects pedals, and they sold almost instantly. And people were like, "Where are the guitars? Please bring them back." And later that year, in 1997, they went ahead and started making the guitars again as reissues. And to this day, they're still making guitars, making pedals. And since the late 90s, they've come out with some fantastic lines of pedals. They came out with the Food series, which is all kinds of effects named after foods. There's the tuna melt tremolo, there's the hash browns, there's so many different kinds of fun names. And then in 2005 came the Fab series. I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. And then most recently they came out with the Billionaire series, and they're dropping guitars today. They're doing really, really big things. So now that I've gone over the history of the brand, I'm gonna get into this specific pedal line and then into the pedal. Okay, so in 2005, Danelectro released their most budget-friendly line of pedals called the Fab series. They came out with 8 pedals. They came out with this metal one, they came out with a chorus, an echo, a flanger, a fuzz, an overdrive, a distortion, and a delay. And of those series, most of them were clones of famous circuits. This one in particular is a clone of the 90s classic pedal, the DoD Grunge, even though it's labeled metal, but I still think it sounds pretty good. And then all of these pedals have the same basic layout. It's usually 3 knobs on top, a plastic enclosure, nice little foot switch down there, LED. And then on the bottom, it's a nice little sturdy metal plate, even though the enclosure is mostly plastic. And a little fun fact about the Fab series is it's one of the best-selling pedal lines of all time. When they were sold in Guitar Center, they sold so many pedals, and since they were so cheap, the profit margins were so slow that they had to stop selling them. So basically, the pedals were too good and too cheap for Guitar Center to make any money, but you can find them readily available, used on Reverb, eBay, basically anywhere where you can buy gear. You can find these pedals for about 20-25 bucks. I picked this one up for 20 shipped. So that's enough talking, let's get into how it sounds. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with my clean channel. And then I'll throw this on, and all the knobs are set at noon, so let's just hear how it sounds. So right off the bat, there's a little bit of background noise, it's not too bad. And it sounds pretty good off bat, just with everything at 12. So that sounded pretty good with standard tuning and single coils. Now I'm going to test it out with drop tuning and some humbuckers. So all in all, I think it really shines with a set of humbuckers and some drop tuning. Overall though, it doesn't really sound bad at all. and for 20 bucks I have 0 complaints. So hopefully you guys liked that video. Hopefully you liked the sound of the pedal, and you learned a little something about the history of Danelectro. But other than that, thank you guys for watching, and have a good one.